Hello there, this is Fiona, host and main GM for What Am I Rolling, a twice-monthly RPG one-shot podcast. This is a bonus Q&A episode to tide us over the next one-shot, and is indeed a very special Q&A, as this week I had the absolute pleasure of interviewing game designer Jason Cordova, the creator behind Brindlewood Bay, The Between, and the recently released analog horror tabletop RPG, Public Access. As well as designing and writing game content, Jason founded The Gauntlet, a community that celebrates tabletop RPGs. Alongside running hundreds of online games every month and hosting a podcast network dedicated to the discussion of tabletop RPGs, The Gauntlet is also a publishing group that puts out the Codex magazine, as well as games such as Trophy and Hearts of Wulin. Jason very kindly ran a two-shot of The Between for us back in January, and honestly, it was such a blast. The VOD of that one-shot is now up on the WAIR YouTube channel, and will be appearing in audio format in the episodes following this interview. I really enjoyed chatting to Jason and discussing his games in detail. I'll be honest, I hadn't read much of his work beforehand, and getting to play in a really cool, creepy, historical horror game and listening to him be passionate about game design, it was really, really cool. There are lots of really cool ideas and interesting game mechanics that are already sort of embedded and baked into the structure of his games. So if you want to try a mystery game with a sprinkling of horror, I recommend checking out his work. I'll put links to the Gauntlet website and Jason's work in this episode's show notes. And we'll just get straight into it. So my first usual question, unfortunately, Jason, it's my go-to, but like, how did you get into the role-playing scene? Did you start out as a player? Were you already a GM? What's your origin story, I guess?
Yeah, my gaming origin story. Well, I started playing role-playing games in the fourth grade. For people in the UK, that's like 10 years old. My dad used to take me to this comic book shop in Oceanside, California, and there was on the shelf the boxed Marvel superheroes game. And I didn't know what it was. I had no idea what a role-playing game was. It was like a completely foreign concept to me. I'd never heard of Dungeons and Dragons. But I convinced my dad to buy it for me. And so he bought it for me. It was the advanced one too. There was like the normal one and the advanced one, but this is the advanced one. So not only did I not know anything about role-playing games, I got like the hardest one in. Yeah, exactly. Right. So I brought it home, and for like a couple months, I still didn't really know like what it was. Like I just read it, and I could not like conceive of what it was. But then an older kid came over and taught me how to do it, taught me how to play the game. And so from there I was really hooked on it. Like it was just like a thing for me, you know. I still kind of really distinctly remember this older kid was running the game for me, and he said, you know, he kind of set up the scenario for me. I was like playing a villain, and I was robbing a jewelry store or something, and and he was like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "What do you mean? What do I do?" He's like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "I don't know. Like, do I roll these dice now, or do I look at this chart? Like, what? I don't know. What do you mean? What do I do?" And he's like, "Just tell me what you do." And so he finally got me to just describe what I did, and I remember like that was just such a light bulb moment for me, you know. It just like clicked into place, like this like possibility, this like world of possibility, you know, that like that unlike video games, like I could just do whatever, you know, and there like the only limitation was with just whatever we talked about, what our imaginations were, you know. And so yeah, I've been pretty much hooked ever since then. I played second edition AD&D. I played all the Palladium games and Shadowrun and all that kind of stuff, and Vampire for a little bit. I got out of role-playing games in like the 3E era. I missed 3E and 4E for that matter. I didn't really play those at all. Yeah. And then I kind of came back with the indie RPG scene. That's really when I came back in 2013. I was very into some of the games that at the time were coming out of what was known as the Forge design movement, and games by like Jason Morningstar and John Harper and people like that, right? And Meg and Vincent Baker, like all their stuff. So at that point, I was looking for people to play these games with, and so I was living in Houston, Texas at the time, and I found a local group that was kind of defunct. It was not really active. It was called The Gauntlet, and I just like went on their little community page and I was like, hey, would anybody be interested in playing these games with me? And someone said yes. And so we started meeting like every Friday night in an office park where they turned the AC off on Fridays, which was no great fun. But we had such a good time, and we just kept it up week after week. And Fridays eventually became Fridays and Wednesdays, and then eventually like Fridays, Wednesdays, and Sundays. And the face-to-face Houston Gauntlet still meets like 2 or 3 times a week, even though I haven't been involved in it in years. And yeah, like at our height in Houston, this would have been around like 2014 or 2015. We would have like 6 tables going and like 20 or 30 people show up, which was huge for indie role-playing games.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because Pathfinder was the only other game in town at that time, you know. From there, it kind of turned into podcasts. I eventually incorporated the Gauntlet, took it over and made it a business. And now we do publishing. And so, yeah, that's sort of the quick summary of my arc, I guess.
Yeah. And it's really interesting to hear you talk about that sort of almost like the galaxy brain moment, as it were, about that sort of like collaborating and not looking to the character sheet or the rules, like supporting them. And yeah, I can totally see that with Jason Morningstar stuff. Like Fiasco is such a beautiful one for that, because you're literally collaborating with all these people across the tables, and you know, using these tables are just like, here's an idea, and you're like, brilliant, and then you run off with it, and it doesn't matter. It's interesting because I too have started to get more and more into those games as well, just because like it gets to a point where I've got too many rules in my head. I just want to perform. I want to improvise. I want to create a story that isn't on the sheets, and that definitely feels like a part of your sort of USP, which I know it's not a term I'm thinking, but like that's such a unique style of all of your games, that there's definitely this collaborative element between the game master facilitator and the players. It's not like one overarching person over the other.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I really do kind of embrace this sort of collaborative storytelling idea. I would say that my games tend to be somewhere in the middle of like very, very rules light stuff like Fiasco and like more traditional games. I do like a little bit more of a system and mechanical framework than some other lighter story games do, but still very collaborative. I mean, I think that probably shows itself most distinctly in the fact that all of my mystery games, you collaborate to solve them. There is you collaborate to come up with the solution. There is no predetermined solution, right?
Yeah.
I just think that's when we talk about like the strengths of role-playing games as a medium, I think that collaborative storytelling aspect to it is a really big part of it, right? And so I think that's where my design kind of lies. It's like, okay, how do we take like the strengths of this medium and harness them to tell the best kind of story or to do genre or whatever, right? And it's been really fun.
Yeah, and actually, talking about it, because your genre, I do think obviously other than horror, but it is mystery
and horror,
but I think the mystery style is interesting. Obviously, I know we'll go into your games in a second, but like for me, not a lot of people, obviously I know obviously with the OGL stuff that's been happening and D&D and everything, obviously everyone uses the 5th edition just now for everything, and I've always said this, right? I feel that system works, but it can't. If you use other systems, that you get so much better stories out of it. And for me, I was always struggling to find a system that could do mystery so well. You know, I think before being introduced to your games, the only other game that sort of came close to it was sort of City of Mists, and obviously that is designed to be like case notes and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's like it's not about. It's how do you write a mystery and then incorporate, ability modifiers and stuff like that. Whereas obviously with your games, you're like, here is the horror, here is the mystery. It's up to the players how to solve it and come up with their theory, which will always be correct unless they roll incorrectly, and it may be partially. And I'm just like, I've never, none of it's, you had the idea and then you can run off, and every time you play it, it's different. And I was just like instantly, I want to play more of these games. So
awesome. It's good. Yeah, I'm glad.
So let's talk about it then. I guess we'll talk about Brindlewood Bay, because I know that sort of came first, even though I know the Between is sort of came before.
Yeah.
For those people who don't know, what is Brindlewood Bay and how does it differ to other RPGs that are out there?
Yeah, well, I will say one thing before I even begin, that by the time this goes out, Brindlewood Bay will be available to pre-order. So if you did not get a physical copy on Kickstarter, you will be able to do so.
Oh my God, amazing.
But yeah, Brindlewood Bay is a game about a group of elderly women in a fictional New England town who are members of a book club called the Murder Mavens. They're a mystery book club. And at the start of the game, they have sort of already helped local law enforcement with a few crimes because they're very good at solving mysteries because of all their expertise from reading mystery books, as you do,
Yeah.
And And then they get wrapped up in real murders. Like there are real murders happening in and around their town. And so the local police are kind of like incompetent. And so the murder mavens are sort of there to solve mysteries, right? And to figure out who did it. The extra fun thing about Brindlewood Bay, because I am always a horror writer before I'm anything else, is that the reason why all these murders are taking place is because Brindlewood Bay is spiritually and geographically significant and historically significant to a cult called the Midwives of the Fragrant Void.
Love it.
This cult is orchestrating the murders ultimately in the background. And so the murder mavens will eventually have to face the cult. And that's the kind of the campaign structure is they have to they have to face down this occult conspiracy. So I like to say that the game it's sort of like Cthulhu She Wrote or Murder She Wrote meets like cosmic horror, like that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's great fun, and as we alluded to earlier, it uses a mystery system which was somewhat unique in the hobby, I would say, where basically the keeper, which is what we call the GM, the keeper has like lists of clues and different things that information they're giving to the players, but there is no predefined solution to the murders of who did it. The players actually gather all the clues that they've got and all the extra context and evidence that they've gathered, and they come up with a theory of the case, and then you roll some dice to see how whether you're correct, or if you're correct but there's maybe like a complication or a problem, or if you're totally wrong and your suspect ends up dead too, right? So that's kind of the gist of it, though. And it's this game that sort of combines this unique mystery system with these sort of cozy murder mystery story elements with these supernatural horror elements as well.
Yeah, no, instantly I'm thinking of, like, as you said, I know you mentioned sort of Murder She Wrote, but like even Only Murders in the Building, which is obviously very recent.
Yeah.
You know, it's just all that sort of stuff where it is, like you said, it's an unlikely protagonist that us younger people wouldn't play, etc. But I'm just like instantly I'm in, and I know a lot of people who obviously have heard of this. They're like, well, when can we play? Because of that sort of different way of looking at it. You're not heroes. You're, again, in quotation marks, past your prime, but there's so much in that game. Like I absolutely love, you've got the move, which is a cozy move, which is obviously like, you know, it's about your relationships with the other mavens and like how you're an individual independent person because your partner's passed away or your children have flown the nest, etc. And it just makes you think about those sort of murder mysteries that usually have a female protagonist, and they don't need any of these extra things per se. And it's so different. And again, I'm like, oh my God, I don't think I've ever read anything like that just has that setting. And I'm like, and there's cosmic horror.
On top of all that, yeah. Right, yeah. Well, one of the things that was like a really big focus of the game for me, in addition to all the things that we've talked about, I really wanted the characters to be like whole characters. Like that was really, really important to me. For a start, we don't usually get like games that center women characters like this, at least not in this particular way, and certainly not older characters, right? And so, you know, in Brindlewood Bay, the sort of setup of the story, like you said, is that they are, you know, their partners are deceased. They are basically, you know, kind of like in the last leg of their lives, but it's like a second life in a way. Like they're sort of like finding new companionship, new friendship, and they have new passions and new, you know, it's just like it's basically like the message of the game is like, you don't have to just like, you know, crawl in your grave at a certain age. Right? Like you get to like keep being a whole person, right?
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
And you can even fight occult forces, right? You know,
it looks to be deceiving. And I really, there's two things that sort of stood out for me, obviously, like the cozy move and then like the Gold Crown Mysteries move, where at any point your players could be like, oh, that reminds me of something that happened to the character in our book series. And I'm instantly gives that improv thing, that collaborative thing, and you're just there as a facilitator going, oh yeah, go on then. And then you're like, yeah, it kind of works, go for it, you know? And I love that, because you obviously have to name the book, you have to name the problem, and let's relate it to the problem that you're trying to solve and the solution that this character comes up with, that then you can go, I guess we could try that. And I just, because that is, again, it's such a big trope in these things, and I just thought that was such a really cool little move, again, that I hadn't seen about that, the flashback moments, and you're just like, I remember this in a book, and then you have to improv it. I just, really love that.
Yeah, the game has lots of like what I would call like sort of meta-textual like things kind of going on in it, you know, not just related to mystery books, but also to television. The game has a big love of like American television in particular. And so, yeah, it's a fun congregation of all the things I love. So, yeah, and I've had great fun with it.
And obviously I know this is when you look at the structure as well, because I think to some people that if they're not so sure, if they're trying to look into new systems, I think obviously your games are so good because they have this structure in place. So you don't have to, if you're not sure about the mystery, like I don't have it all completely, and you have to share with the players, and it's maybe something that you're uncomfortable with, at least the structure is there, having this way to move through the game, and it's always the same per session. And I just thought that was really cool, including, again, kudos to you, this idea of the cut to commercial thing, where something goes wrong and you're like, okay, we're going to cut to commercial, and get them to do a prompt where you go, what on earth have they done? I got to think of a way to solve it. But I love that. Again, that's a very improv-y thing. And I just, that idea that you can just, okay, now you're going to narrate a commercial. How are you going to get out of this? What do you normally see? Giving them the prompt to do that. And I just thought, yeah, I really love that.
One thing that that kind of sticks out to me, I'm a GM before I'm anything, I run lots and lots of games. And even to this day, I probably run like 4 sessions a week, right? And
Wow.
and always just for people in our community, just like our fans, I just run them for random people who want to play. And but I really love running games, and I have baked a lot of my own like kind of GM knowledge and techniques like directly into the rules of the game, And so some of those structural elements and those procedural elements, they come straight from like just how I run games, And I think that actually my favorite bit of feedback I ever get from any of my games is when somebody sends me a message and they're like, this was the first time I GM'd something. Like I've never GM'd something before, and it was great. Or I wasn't sure. I've only ever played D&D, and I wasn't sure if I could ever do like Powered by the Apocalypse or a similar type of thing. And I felt really comfortable like with the text and like it. So like I love that. Like that's my favorite thing. Like I love like when people respond to that part of it, because the books truly are like probably 2/3 of each book is like essentially my love letter to other GMs, like basically just saying like, okay, you're going to do this and you're going to do this and it's going to be so great. And then you're going to do that, like, it's very like kind of like very advice focused for GMs. Like I just like that kind of, writing.
And it really is as well. Like again, all the sort of stuff comes into the sort of broken sort of playbooks and all that sort of thing. So it's all can be quite separated. But yeah, I definitely noticed that while sort of reading for this interview, it's just like, it was like, oh, by the way, this move, don't worry about it, just do this, and just it felt like, oh, you're Jason, you're here talking to me. It's fine.
I'm just here talking to you. Yep, exactly right.
And I appreciate books like that, because so many times you get into a new system, whatever, and go, here's the mechanics, and then it's like, here's all the lore, here's stuff you shouldn't do, and you're just there going, and that's it. But like here you've obviously got your structure, you've got, like you said, the Powered by the Apocalypse, that's sort of the underlying sort of system for the mechanic, and then you've just got you just going, hey, these moves, this might happen. If it happens, think like this, right. This, but don't worry about that. Only if it happens, And I'm like, brilliant.
Yeah, the keeper chapters, especially in the new edition of Brindlewood Bay and in the Between, I even say at the beginning of those chapters, I'm like, just so you know, the tone and voice of these chapters is different than the previous chapters, because now it's just me talking to you, and we're going to just have a little chat, a one-way chat, but a chat,
Yeah, you'll listen to me. Yeah, no. Well, then let's move on to the Between. Now, obviously, I feel incredibly biased at this point, because obviously you have run a game of the Between that will be coming out on the podcast.
Yeah, it was a great fun.
It was so much fun. Again, I had very little idea what I was going to be stepping into, and it just felt to me everything I wanted in a horror game, which I appreciate. Is just
Thank
me.
you.
I get you on to do an interview, and I'm just going to say you were great. I really enjoyed it. We'll start properly then. How did you describe the Between, and how is it different to Brindlewood Bay?
Yeah, the Between is a game about a group of monster hunters in Victorian era London who are associates or residents of this place called Hargrave House, which is in Belgravia. And the game is directly inspired by Penny Dreadful. That is the direct inspiration for it. I was literally like, I want to make a Penny Dreadful game. There's no Penny Dreadful game. But it also takes a lot of inspiration from, British horror classics, stuff like, the Sherlock Holmes books and things like that. And also the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is another big influence on it. But anyway, you're monster hunters, and like Brindlewood Bay, it has sort of a mystery system at its core. It's the same mystery system, except this time the questions are expanded beyond just who did a murder. Now it's, is this vampire actually a child, or is it just a really old vampire in a child's body? Or why is this ghost causing all this trouble? What can we do to get this ghost to calm down and go away? Like, so the questions that you're investigating are expanded. And so it uses a slightly reframed mystery system from Brindlewood Bay to sort of expand the possibilities of what you can investigate. And the monsters are frequently literal monsters, but they can also be sort of serial killer type monsters, because it takes place in Victorian era London. You have your whole passel of Jack the Ripper style killers, that are out there in the world. And it's a more mechanically intricate game than Brindlewood Bay. It has playbooks instead of a common character sheet, and it has a couple of mechanical and structural things that Brindlewood Bay doesn't have. But I think it's still very easy to run and play. Structure really does a lot of work in this game, and it keeps everything kind of like nice and tight and on track. And the biggest piece of feedback I always get from it is, I didn't know I could ever just create things like that at the table. I didn't know that was something I could do, and it's like, yeah, you can do it. And you were able to do it because the game has built in like structure and procedures for like helping facilitate this certain kind of storytelling, right? And so, yeah, you're going to get gothic horror, you're going to get romance, you're going to get bloody violence, you're going to get all these things, and it's going to be evocative and sensory and sensual, and so that's kind of where it lives. It's Brindlewood Bay has like a kind of kitsch camp element to it, but the between is very, very like brooding, brooding and gothic and dark, and that's a space that I like to live sometimes. And so it was the two games are in conversation with one another from a design standpoint, like they feed off each other quite a bit and in their development, or they have in the past. But it's I think it's the ultimate gothic horror game. Like 100%. If that's what if that's what you want that, you're going to get it.
Yeah, 100%. Like, again, I had not come across anything like that. And instantly, as soon as you sort of talked us through it and then were revealing these threats and stuff, I was like, oh, yes, it is like Penny Dreadful. Oh, yay! And my heart sort of excited, because I've been running a lot of like horror games, in the sense of I've done Call of Cthulhu, I'm doing Alien just now, and of course they are like, here are big horror tropes. And it was so different to actually come into a game which is all about, like you said, the sensory. It's all this sort of seductiveness about it.
It's very seductive.
And I was just like, oh, I just want to play more of this. And as I said to you at the time. But one thing that really struck me about this game, you said it to us, like, don't come up with a backstory. We're going to find it out through play.
Yes, yeah.
And oh man, that is a big weight off my mind as a player. Like, done.
That's good.
But also, it just meant you were in the moment as a player, because obviously there are moves where you would go, okay, now you narrate a flashback from your past, or you mention a detail now, and then it just made me feel like when I was doing it, I was like, oh, I can just literally improvise and go off and do the stuff, but be taking those details from the players right now at the table, rather than spending hours on a document going, and this is what I'm, and this is my CV. And I don't know any other game that deliberately says don't do any backstory.
It is the only game I'm aware of, and I'm guessing that just because it is the sort of thing that some people have a bit of, I don't want to say trouble, but like it always gives them pause at first, because one of the fun things in role-playing games is making your character, right? Like that's something that people love to do. And there's a certain type of player who really, really loves to think about their character's backstory and wants to tell you about it. All my game says is, don't tell us about it yet. Like, go ahead and think about it. You've got a whole list of prompts to to facilitate your thinking about it. And when we go home and we come back next week, you can have thought about it. Just don't tell us yet. Like, just tell us. You only tell us when it's like dramatically interesting. And that's because we intend for the game to be cinematic, right? Some people like to improvise on the fly too, and that's fine as well. So it's the cinematic approach to character backstory, where, as a comparison, if you were watching a TV show, it would be a very, very bad TV show if they just told you all of the characters' stuff like in episode 1 in the first hour, right? Like that would be really terrible. And you learn it throughout, you learn it like in key moments, and that's kind of what the Between is trying to emulate.
Absolutely. And I definitely see what you mean by that, sort of like having those things. But I think also, again, another big kudos to you and obviously writers on it. It's like when you come up with those prompts and asking them, like, like when you do the Janus mask and you're like, something, what about this that is specific? And that instantly goes, oh, I have to hone in on this moment as a player,
Yeah.
rather than necessarily think. So yeah, you could have this idea in the background, but then you go, okay, let's just go with this moment.
You got to focus it a little bit.
Yeah.
I find that this is a design thing that's really important to me, actually. I have this sense and indeed experience with a lot of story games and less traditional games where they sometimes have what I call a getting started problem. I actually think Fiasco has this problem. I love Fiasco, but Fiasco, in my opinion, has sometimes a bit of a getting started problem, because you do all this great setup and then you kind of like, well, what do we do now?
Yes, agreed.
And the way I try to elide like sort of this kind of basic problem that a lot of games have is I do have a lot of more like, there's like leading questions and there's like really specific prompts, and not just on the character sheet, but like whenever you visit new locations, there's stuff that the keeper like kind of prompts you with. And I find that that's, rather than limiting you by saying, tell me about A, B, and C, what it really does is it expands your possibilities, right? Because you go deeper, right? Like if you know you have to talk about A, B, and C, you're ready to talk a lot about A, B, and C, right? Instead of like not knowing whether you're supposed to do A, P, Q, L, or M, right? Like that's the difference, right? And so and again, that really just goes back to what I said earlier about like, I design the way I play. I mean, like this is how it is. Like all these things that are in my games, like paint the scene questions and various questions that you pose and different structural elements, sharing backstory, all this stuff is just like how I used to ad hoc run my games of like Dungeon World or whatever, right? Like it was just the way I ran those games, and so I just kind of codified it and made it like official in my games.
And the other thing that really stands out to me, and I'm sure you get asked, told that this all the time in a sense of it, but like the unseen idea, that sort of element of like, here's something that's not related to the story that's also going on, and now players tell us about it and be prompted to do that. And then having this idea of the echoes in the night of like bits of these elements are back and forth. Again, it feels so cinematic and so cool as a player, describing a scene that you have no investment in, and then you're like, okay, and then you're talking afterwards going, oh, but I saw this in that scene with you, and then like making those connections is really fun. And again, I had not seen that really in other things, and it feels very improv-y as well.
The unseen is another quite novel thing in the hobby. It's this idea. So I had this idea when I was creating the Between, especially, is I want this to be cinematic. I want it to be cinematic, and I want the city of London, or at least our version of it, I want it to be a character in the story as well.
Right.
And so I created this idea. It was originally called the Overseen, and then it was called it had another name before that, and it eventually I landed on this sort of like wordplay of unseen.
Yeah, love it.
And it's this scene that takes place on the same night as whatever your characters are doing, but in a different part of the city. Like you said, has no direct connection to the events of the story, but they can be thematically connected, or they can be connected via motif or visuals, right? And you get experience points if you make those connections. And so it just serves to create this, like, it really does feel like you're watching like the B-roll or something, or like or something like that, right? Like, or you're looking at like it's a cinematic narrative framing device. It's like, okay, we're seeing this story of this couple in London who are at each other's throats, and one of them's going to kill the other one by the end. Has nothing to do with what we're doing in the main story, but there are themes that we can connect up to what's going on in the main story. And it's a really, when I created this device, I felt pretty confident it would work, but it wasn't until we started doing it and actually playing it,
I can imagine,
where I was like, okay, it's working. Like people get it. People get it, and it just creates this like richness of experience that I just think that it's what I turn up for. Like, this is why I play role-playing games, like this is why I do this. Like I want this like rich, deep thematic storytelling experiences. And I'm like anybody else, I like games where you just sometimes kill monsters and collect loot. That has a certain pleasure to it. Like I won't lie, but that's not what I write. Like what I write is this much more like kind of cinematic, like kind of narratively rich and deep like stuff, and importantly, how do I create a design structure so that you as a player can do that, right? Like it's not just dependent on you being like particularly creative or improv, skilled. Like you are guided and prompted in a way that you're contributing to the story in super cool ways.
And all those prompts are so, again, they had that focused element of it. So you're not, you're not constantly like grasping for things. So it feels very focused. So you could literally just say a sentence or two, or you can go into a big long speech.
Or go deeper. Yeah.
And I completely agree, because I think, again, you write about it in the Between, that this idea that making London a character, and it feels like as such a big trope in I don't say UK literature, but like sort of I'm thinking of Thomas Hardy, Jane Austen. There's always like, and now we look at the location. Thomas Hardy's always about the heath, and it's like no matter if it's so dark or like, it's always about the heath, and it's about the little people, and then zooming in on these things. So it feels incredibly British. So kudos, I really enjoyed that. I was like, with all those out the way, you know, you got Brindlewood Bay, the Between. What is public access and how does it differ?
Public access, yeah. Public access is my third game. Fourth, if you count The Between Ghosts of El Paso, which is like a spinoff of The Between.
Yes.
A cowboy spinoff. But third, my third solo authored game. Public access is a game about a group of young people. They're like in their early 20s in the year 2004 specifically, who are investigating the disappearance of a public access television station that was in their town that they grew up in. They didn't know each other as kids, but they've found each other as adults on this forum that explores the disappearance of this public access TV station called TV Odyssey. And it's the literal disappearance. It vanished. Like the building physically vanished from the space. The local authorities at the time said it burned down, but there was no evidence of that. And indeed, nobody in this little town that the station was in, it's called Deep Lake, New Mexico. This little town in New Mexico, nobody will remember, or they're willingly or willfully forgetting like this public access TV station existed. And so your characters go back to Deep Lake as adults in 2004 because they met on the internet, and now they're just going to have a fun summer together, trying to see if they can find out what happened. They're not like they go there almost like it's like a lark, you know. It's like, well, let's just see, you know. And so while they're there, they're asking around and they're not making any headway on that mystery, but they get wrapped up in other mysteries around Deep Lake. So, you know, urban legends, creepypasta type things, you know, those sorts of like early internet stories. Like it's inspired by that kind of stuff, right? But as they're sort of doing those mysteries, they are getting closer to figuring out what happened to TV Odyssey, because in the fiction of the game, and indeed in the mechanics as well, there is this concept of the Odyssey tape. So there are these tapes that contain episodes of the programs that aired on TV Odyssey. And the tapes are, they're very weird. They're frequently extremely scary. And it's the unseen mechanic of Between, except it's more built into the fiction of the story of the characters, where essentially at night, your characters, if they've managed to find a tape, they can choose to, you know, quote unquote, watch the tape. And what they're really doing is just like, you're just creeping each other out as players, describing what's going on in the tape, you know? But, you know, as you collect a certain number of tapes, the campaign progresses, and eventually you're able to figure out what happened to TV Odyssey. So the game is analog horror. It is found footage horror. It is 80s sort of synthwave, vaporwave aesthetic. It's cults in the desert, it's urban legends, it's slasher flicks come to life. Like it's all these sorts of things, this sort of really particular American pop culture in particular, from like the 80s to like early 90s, or like late 70s or early 90s. It's this sort of cultural stew that all kind of comes together. And it's a really, really personal game in the sense that in 2004, I was the age of the characters that, you know, and I love all the things that they love. And it's a game about nostalgia. It's a game about childhood and childhood trauma. It's a game about friendship, but also it's a game about this strange place in the desert that might be a portal to some other dimension, right? And that's why all this is happening. And so yeah, that's basically what it is. It mechanically, it uses a combination of Brindlewood Bay and The Between. It very much like mashes them up to create something new. And I'm really happy with it. The reception has been, it's only been out for like a little over a week, and the reception has been super positive. Everybody's like, wow, this is like a new thing. Like this is not something we've seen before. And so that makes me really happy. And
good.
I'm always trying to like deliver new things to people, and so I'm happy that people are like seeing this and they're like, whoa, this is like nothing that else is out there. And so that makes me really happy.
again, for me, so compared to the Between, which obviously does have an antagonist presence you can always sort of attribute to, you have a similar thing here, but no central villain or anything. You just have the big man, which
the big man
freaks me out, even though
yeah.
and you have this idea, like, obviously, like you said, the more tapes you watch, it sort of unlocks several layers, but obviously you get to a point and you're like, well, then you're retired, and I'm like, no, I want to find out. And I really liked, again, how you wrote about this idea, like what is happening to this person who, you know, appears in the sort of the Stinger episodes and then slowly starts becoming, you know, you see them
integrated in the story, yeah.
And I'm like, nope, that's like proper. The what's it? Is it The Following? I can't remember the one that's always coming towards you no matter what. And I'm like,
yeah, It Follows. Yeah, it's a little bit like that.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, It Follows is a great touchstone for this game, actually, because it has a lot of the same like kind of aesthetic and nostalgic vibes that Public Access does. The big man, this character, you're right. There is no central villain in this story, unlike in Brindlewood Bay and The Between. It's more of a central mystery more than a central villain. But we do have this character that acts as a sort of Greek chorus / narrator / pseudo antagonist, but not really.
No.
The big man is a character that recurs in all my games in different forms. He is the man in the sun mask in The Between.
Oh, shit.
He is,
sorry.
he shows up in different contexts in all the things we publish, and because he's almost like an archetype of a character. But but in this game, he really gets to be a central kind of figure. And his function is like, if you imagine like the log lady in Twin Peaks, you know, like, you know, the log lady, she's there, she lives in the town, but she comments, right? She has like things to say, and it's cryptic, and it enhances the weirdness. That's sort of what the big man is.
Definitely.
He is there to enhance the weirdness and to say cryptic things, and the keeper is armed with all kinds of fun quotes and stuff for the big man. Like, you go in knowing how to play the big man, you know.
Yeah.
And it's fun. And whenever he shows up on screen, like, the players are always like delighted. Like, it's an exciting thing to happen. He actually originated from, I ran this Monster Hearts actual play a few years ago, which is in one of our podcast feeds, called Mercy Falls. And he served a similar function in that campaign. That's where I started to develop him as a character. And then I eventually kind of incorporated him into more formally into some of the stuff we were doing. But he's loads of fun to play.
I can totally see that. And yeah, you've written these amazing quotes that you can just drop in. But yeah, as you put it, weird, cryptic, but also likable. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, he's very likable. Yeah, he's very like, he's meant to like you're meant to like be excited to see him, right?
Sure.
Yeah. I like characters like that. Like, even in The Between, like Theodora Brathwaite, who is the villain of the initial villain, if you play her first in the campaign, she's still very likable, right? Like, even though she's the bad guy, like, everybody loves Theodora, right? Like, it's that kind of thing.
No, I get that. I guess because obviously that's obviously 3 very different games, but obviously using that same sort of like that framework and stuff like that. I guess my question to you is like, what's been the best part of designing these games? Like, what's the bit that you've like sparks joy or something? Like, what is that sort of, you get up and you're like, I'm going to design this today? What's that sort of thing that gives you that?
It's our community, really, honestly. Like, I mean, I love writing this stuff, and I love designing stuff and creating frameworks for people. But what I really, really love is watching, you know, our community of like very engaged writers and creators take these games and create stuff for them. And these games have a lot of space for that to happen, because you can write scenarios, or you can write unscenes, or you can write Odyssey tapes, or you can do playbooks or whatever. Like, there's a lot of space to like create things. And so that's what gets me excited. I like to know that I'm creating something that somebody is going to take it to places I never even foresaw. Like, the Between creative community is huge. Like, there's a homebrew list that floats around, and it's enormous. Like, people have taken the Between in places that I literally could not like have even thought of, you know. Like, it's still kind of fundamentally the same game, but it just has like, you know, when people bring their own perspectives to it and their own creativity to it, especially if you've given them the tools to do it effectively, that's really fun to see. And then as a publisher, I have the added bonus of like, if there's something that I see that would really fit with what we're doing, I could be like, hey, you know what? Like, let's go ahead and like elevate this and publish it, right? Let's get it, let's clean it up and get it out there, you know? And so that's been really fun too. So like, for Brindlewood Bay, there's a total of like 40 mysteries that are official mysteries. I've only written 6 of them. The other 34 are written by other people, right? I've only written like 5 or 6 between mysteries, and there's like 100 of those, and like so not that many, but there's a lot.
Yeah.
And so that's been really fun for me. Like there's this part of me that's not just a game writer, but also like an editor and a publisher, where I get to sort of see what the community is doing. And we're fortunate because the games are, reasonably successful, that we're able to like pay people to create stuff for them, and so it's fun to be able to like take other people's creative visions and then put it through my editorial filter, so that it feels like it's part of the game, like it's something, it's like all one product, and I find that very, very enjoyable. It's an enjoyable part of the process. And we try to like facilitate this a lot, like by doing contests and other things. Like right now we're doing a public access writing contest, right? So that's going on as we speak. And my hope is that, we'll see some cool stuff, and maybe there will be something that we'll like and that will make it an official part of the game. But if not, that's okay too. People can do whatever they want with their mysteries. We have workshops, like there'll be a workshop that people can attend to support that contest. And then we're just always doing stuff like this. We're always like kind of like trying to really, really like cultivate writing talent. I think that's a really big part of what we do. I think that our games are much more literary and authorly, than I think that a lot of other games are. A lot of games are just systems, but these are like systems, but also like creative works, with like quotes and language and description. Which is not to say there aren't other games like that. Obviously there are, but but we focus on it though, right? It's a big focus for us, right? Like we really focus on these really like rich details, and so we're trying to like create this like creative space where people feel emboldened to create for our games, and possibly, if it's something that works with what we're doing, get published by us or someone else, right? And so that's really fun for me.
Yeah, just to like literally jump on that. Yeah, you're all again in all 3 of the books. You're always like, here's how you do this, and it's so straightforward. And like, you want to make a custom mood, just do this and do this. And I'm just like, oh my god! Like, I mean, some like say I don't know, D&D people don't even do that in their actual games. Of like, do you want to do a heist? Good luck. Like, come on.
Right. Yeah.
So so it feels so welcoming actually. Like again,
good.
But it's true. Like you've got these really interesting ideas, and you're like, here's a system. If you want to change it, here's how you do it. And then like you said, like all this sort of thing, like you said, the welcomeness of the community, that author type thing. So it's not only just a game just for players, but I definitely feel like, oh man, I could definitely see why people would be inspired, because it's so easy. It's everything's laid out. And I, as someone who runs and plays in games, and I don't necessarily write my own content at all, but I'm just like, but it could be so easy. And
you could, right? You could, right? Like there's like, if I mean, my whole writing career is evidence of like, there are not many chromosomes separating like being a GM and being a game creator, right? Like very, very similar activities, right? So it does not take much to like flip over to that other side. Now, the trickier aspects are, of course, like marketing and all that stuff. That's all stuff that, you got it. But like the act of just going from being a GM to being like a content creator or a creator of game stuff, like that's very not easy, but the path is straightforward, right? Like
the path is straightforward. It just needs you to put one foot and then go down the slope, right? And hopefully
getting started is the hardest part, right? Yeah,
exactly. So then the flip side of that question, which I appreciate isn't necessarily the nicest question, so feel free to like change it to how you want, but what's been the toughest challenge, would you say, with designing these sort of games? Or has there been any challenges, any obstacles that you could think of, God, like I wish I'd known about this before I'd started, if you see what I mean?
That's a good question. I think for me, I would say probably the toughest thing for me of this I'll talk about it from a business standpoint.
Please, yeah.
There's a hard part of this from a business standpoint where you achieve a certain level of success, and I'm very fortunate to have built a fairly successful little publishing business, but you're kind of like in this weird space where things ramp up really quickly and you suddenly have to pivot, and you have to become more business oriented and logistics oriented and project management oriented, and you're doing well, but maybe not so well that you can like hire all the people you need to hire, right?
Of course,
and so you're in this like really like kind of tough space a lot of the time. There's a part of me that almost wishes that like my games were just like kind of more niche and I could just focus on the creative aspects and not worry about the business aspects of it. But but I do strive for them to be successful business wise as well. And so we are definitely like in this weird like growth place right now where our games are having like pretty good success, but we're not quite at a level to where I can like hire up,
Yes, I
and
understand,
so
yeah.
that's hard. That's the business side of it. The creative side of it, I don't know how, for me, it's not so much like difficulty. I think it was more just figuring out how I work creatively. So I had to discover a few things about myself. First thing, Brindlewood Bay was the first creative writing thing I'd ever done. Like for one
Really?
thing,
Amazing.
yeah. I've been or published, or actually finished. I'll say finished,
right. Yeah. Sure.
But actually finished.
Yeah.
And so that was something. But also, there was a learning process where I had to figure out like how I create, how I write, what my rhythms are, and so for me, I had to figure out like, okay, it does not do you any good to just sit down and just look at a blank page and try to write. Like, it's not how you work.
No.
What I do is I think about something for sometimes literal months, and then I let it stew, and then when I'm ready to write it, I sit down and I knock it out in no time flat. Right?
Whoa.
Yeah, like I wrote public access literally in like 4 days, right?
What? Oh my God.
I wrote, but I've been thinking about it for a long, long time. And public
Sure.
access in particular has been on the back burner for a long time. But when I finally sat down to do it was when it had all clicked in place in my head, Same thing for Brindlewood Bay. I wrote Brindlewood Bay in a few days. I wrote The Between in like 2 weeks. But there was a process before that where it's like just thinking, putting it all together in my head, understanding how it has to look and be in my head, and then ultimately finally like sitting down and writing is the last part for me. Like it's the last final step, and that's not how everyone works, but it's how I work. And I had to kind of figure that out,
Yeah, absolutely.
I had to figure out like the relationship between media consumption and how I create, right? Like reading books, and how important is it to read books and to watch different things and expand your horizons. And last year was very much a sort of like gathering creative inspiration year, and so I read like 55 books last year.
God, wow.
And it was all because I was just like devouring this stuff that I would eventually bring into public access, right? It was all stuff that like I was like, okay, I'm reading lots of horror. I'm reading lots of Stephen King. I'm reading lots of reading just lots of like stuff that fits with my what I think public access is going to be. And so I'm just absorbing, and then start of the year I wrote it. Like that's
done.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say it's a difficulty, but you definitely have to understand like how you create, what your rhythms are, and try not to. I think it's a mistake to try to do what other people do. Like if it works for you, then good. But I think that you have to be really conscious of like what your creativity is like. And sometimes it seems like you're not doing anything, but you really are, And that's important. It's important that like sometimes you just need like time to kind of just sit with something, and it doesn't seem like you're quote unquote working, but you are working. And that's important to acknowledge.
No, I really appreciate that. As somebody who definitely is very similar and like, I've got plenty of time, and then okay, it's 2 days to go. Right, crack fingers, let's go. But it's true. I think a lot of that research part is actually so interesting, and then being able to put it together, like you said, and then be like, oh, now it makes sense, rather than like you said, just staring at a blank page for several days and be going, I don't know, my name several times done, like wasting time. I think on that front. So I definitely see the value of that. But my penultimate question for you, Jason, is if there was like a piece of advice you would give someone who was going to run any of your games, it's their first time sort of running a game, what would be that piece of advice? If there is, like, you might just be like, read the book.
Well, that is probably my advice, but
true.
also, so every game that we publish has a session 1 procedure in it. So, well, that's not true. Trophy doesn't, but Trophy does have lots of other support stuff. But our other games, though, they all have a session 1 procedure in the back of the book. And so if nothing else, do that, read that and do that. And the first hour or so of your first session will at least be scripted and really good and done. But hopefully what that will do, that scripted portion, will give you a chance to sort of, it kind of gives you a low stakes chance of like being in the spotlight for a little bit as the keeper, to sort of get into a certain rhythm in terms of how you present things. So definitely follow the session 1 procedure. I think that's something that we've constructed for you as a first-time GM for our games. So definitely use that.
Yes.
But big picture, though, even better, though, I think in terms of a more satisfying answer probably is figure out what the media touchstones are and watch some of them. If you're going to run Brindlewood Bay, I strongly recommend you watch the first 3 episodes of Murder, She Wrote, because those first 3 episodes are like half the initial mysteries in like they're direct inspirations for like half the mysteries in the core book. So you don't even have to get that far in Murder She Wrote. Just watch the first few.
Yeah.
For the between, you can do a lot worse than watching episodes 1 through 3 of season 1 of Penny Dreadful. Those first 3 episodes of Penny Dreadful are like the between. Like that's what the between is those 3 episodes. And for public access is all about vibes. I don't know, like find our playlist on Spotify or something and just vibe, you know. It's so much about vibes. But no,
listen to Don't Sleep, you know.
Yeah, inspirations. Follow the guidance in the book, obviously, and do the session 1 procedure. But otherwise, like just, you know, our games are all about nostalgia and retro feeling and media touchstones and genre. And so you can never go wrong by just, you know, engaging with that genre or that media touchstone a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. No, and I just thank you so much for introducing me to a world where I was like, oh, brilliant. I don't have to play any of those games. These are great. My sort of final question to you is, you know, where can we find all of your work? Where, if you've got any on any social media? Also, if there is, I appreciate public access has literally come out, but are there any other projects you want to talk about?
Sure,
please,
yeah.
You know, feel free to mention them if you wish to, but obviously there's no pressure to. But yeah, but where can we find all of your wonderful work?
As far as where you can find our stuff, we have a website. It's the Gauntlet website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. And we have a couple of different Twitter presences. There's a main Twitter account at Gauntlet RPG, but then also the Trophy RPG Twitter account, and there's a Brindlewood Bay Twitter account as well. So those are pretty easy to find. And then I'm on Twitter at Jason Cordova 6. That's my only social media presence. I'm theoretically on Facebook, but I only log in like once every 6 months. Otherwise, our Discord is really great. That's really our nerve center in the Gauntlet, like that Discord server. So I recommend that. Maybe we'll have a link or something wherever this shows up.
Yes.
As far as games that are coming up, I'm happy to talk about them. So this is we have promised 4 big games this year, and public access was the first, and so we're on track. The other 3 big games coming out are variations of the Brindlewood Bay Mystery System. We have, this is not the order they're coming in, but it's
whenever you sit down to write them, right?
Yeah. So the first is the role-playing game called Arkham Herald. So Arkham Herald is by Ollie Jeffrey with contributions from myself and some other folks as well. It is a game about newspaper reporters in 1970s Arkham, Massachusetts.
Wow.
And it is a Cthulhu Mythos game. It's a straight Cthulhu Mythos game, not like this sort of fake mythos thing that Brindlewood Bay is. It is like, it's Cthulhu, it's all that stuff, right? And so but basically these are newspaper reporters in 1970s Arkham, and they are honing in on this like sort of conspiracy related to Cthulhu, and there's other conspiracies that you can do, but the initial campaign is Cthulhu. But what's great about the game is it takes its inspirations from like 1970s political thrillers and 1970s sort of serial killer movies and stuff like that, right? So, or even like stuff from the 90s, but with that same flavor, like Seven, like movies like that.
Oh, lovely.
And so, these newspaper reporters are basically following up on like bloody crime scenes and gang violence and drug violence. It's really, really gnarly, gritty kind of setting. But underneath it all, there's this occult conspiracy, right? There's this Cthulhu conspiracy, right? And so it's sort of taking this sort of like Cthulhu mythos and bringing it into this like really, really, really like grimy, gritty setting. And I'm pretty excited about it. It should be good fun. And then we have the Silt Versus role-playing game. The Silt Versus is a audio drama podcast. It's published by Rusty Quill, but it's this it's not hard to describe, but basically it's this horror podcast about a world that's kind of like our modern world, but everything is focused on gods. And so you have like, you know, you might have a god just in your backyard, right? In the fountain, you know, you might like, there are like all kinds of little local gods. Everything has a god, right? And there's gods that are corporate branded gods and all this other stuff, right? You play characters who are basically dealing with the sort of lost and forgotten gods that are causing trouble. So there are these like abandoned gods that still want to be worshipped and they still want sacrifice, and you have to travel to these communities and figure out, okay, how do we get this abandoned harvest god to chill the fuck out so we can like so this
Yeah.
community can keep going.
Amazing.
You know?
Love that.
Yeah, or there's this like family god that lived in their backyard. Now it's escaped, and that family moved away decades ago, and now it's just roaming around. Like, well, what do we do about it? You know. So that's sort of what the Silt versus game is about. The podcast is excellent. I really recommend it. It's so good. And then our final game is Moonlight Vale for this year. That's going to be later this year, but Moonlight Vale. Oh, and I should mention the Silt versus is by Gabriel Robinson and myself. And then Moonlight Vale is by Alex Rabitsky and Megan Caldwell. And it is essentially Stardew Valley, but with Brindlewood Bay mystery mechanics on top of it.
Oh, yay. Oh,
Yeah, so
excellent.
not a strict horror game, more of like it definitely has like farming sim vibes. But it also has like small town mysteries, right? So it's the Stardew Valley mystery game. Yeah.
Oh my God. Like I as soon as you say every single one of them, I'm like, well, okay, I'm playing that. Okay.
Good.
That's so cool. I'm very excited about it. What a cool year you've got coming out. Now that public access out, you've got all these
Yeah, we're hitting it hard. Yeah, we are so deep in editorial and all these different games, and it's great fun. It's very exciting, and we owe it all to Brindlewood Bay. Yes. Brindlewood Bay's success is why we're able to do this. But yeah, we're not resting on our laurels, that's for sure.
No, not at all, not at all. And you said that was it the pre-order for the hardback for
and Brindlewood Bay is available. Yeah, you can for Brindlewood Bay, and the supplement Nephews in Peril are available to order hardback. There's also a collection of you can get there's suspect cards and needlepoint dice. That's a brand new thing just for pre-order. So those are available as well.
Fantastic. Oh, well, thank you so much, Jason, for listening to me gushing at you for like an hour.
Oh, thank you for having me. I somehow managed.
I know. I'm just like, oh, okay, I'll take your compliments. Fine. But no, I honestly, if for those people listening, I had such a good time with Between, and then reading through these other games, I'm just there going, why aren't more people in the UK talking about it? I'm sure, like you said, your Discord community is so beautiful and sort of like really engaging and stuff like that. But I'm like, why? I need to talk to other people about your games. So I might start with you. How's that?
I love it. Yeah, I love it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I'm hoping to do more of these special Q&A bonus episodes in future, including Q&As on the one-shots we've run here at What Am I Rolling? If you have a question or think of an RPG designer you'd like to see interviewed on this podcast, let us know. Our email address is whatamirollingpodcast@gmail.com. And that's it. Great. See you next time.